Good morning. I am Deirdre Heck, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Welcoming Congregation Committee. We have a special guest with us here this morning. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Genny Beemyn. They are considered one of the country's leading scholars on the experiences and needs of trans and non-binary college students. Genny has been researching, writing, and speaking on the topic for more than 25 years. Coming out in 2001, they were one of the first, if not the first, out non-binary college administrators. Since 2006, they have been the director of the UMass Amherst Stonewall Center. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Genny Beemyn.
Thank you very much. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here and also be part of the panel this afternoon on trans and non-binary healthcare. And I say that as somebody who has been a diehard women's basketball fan for the past 40 years. This is the holiest of holy days in the women's basketball calendar. And I also got my PhD at the University of Iowa. So I'm missing my team play today. Go Hawks. And I mentioned the University of Iowa because it was there that I became a trans activist. Even before I identified as trans, actually. A local trans woman had experienced discrimination from a business, and I was part of a group of folks that pushed for Iowa City, where University of Iowa is, to add gender identity to its non-discrimination policy. And at the time, it was the smallest, or actually second smallest, community in the country to have protection based upon gender identity. And after that, decided, I should get the university to do likewise. So myself and a faculty person went and did that, got the university to add gender identity to its non-discrimination policy. We did not know at the time that no other college in the country had done that. This was 1996. And no college in the country had any trans-inclusive policies at that time. And the university didn't know this either. I'm sure if they did know that, they would not have so readily added that to their non-discrimination policy. But when I recognized that, it really got me motivated to really be advocating for trans-inclusive policies and to be speaking about and writing about the needs and experiences of trans and non-binary folks. And I haven't stopped because universities still don't do enough to support their trans and non-binary students. And through this, I came out myself as being non-binary in the late 1990s. I had never felt myself to be, as I was assigned at birth, male, but I didn't really feel myself to be female either. And for a long time, I just had no idea what that meant, how to process that. I came across the word genderqueer online and said, that reflects who I am as someone who's not male, not female, something beyond that. And so I started using that for myself. I didn't know anyone at the time who identified as genderqueer, or even know of people who identified as genderqueer at that time, which is rather odd to take on an identity where you don't even know anyone who also identifies that way. But I did, because it made sense to me, even if it didn't make sense to other people around me. But it wasn't for years until I met someone else who identified as non-binary. And those were my students. It's been amazing to see just how things have changed. From my days back in the 1990s of not knowing anyone else who's non-binary to today with a vast majority of young people who are identifying as trans or non-binary are identifying as non-binary. Like 80-some%, according to my research, other folks' research, of trans and non-binary young people are identifying as non-binary. And the number of young people identifying as non-binary has just skyrocketed. in the past decade. One study says that in the past 5 years alone, the number of young people who are out as non-binary has more than tripled. And that's the folks who are willing to say so on a survey, which of course, I'm sure some folks don't want to do that. So very different than what it was just 25 years ago. Now, the folks who are the haters will say, well, it's because it's a fad. It's trendy today to be non-binary, which is, if you think about it, just ridiculous. My research, other folks' research shows that young people who identify as trans or non-binary experience a great deal of discrimination, experience harassment, even violence. You know, I'm in Amherst, you know, pretty progressive community. We've had a huge issue the past year with trans and non-binary students being harassed in our middle school, both by other students, but also by some staff people. So it's hardly the cool thing to be non-binary today. What has changed from my time to today is images of non-binary people in society, in pop culture. Like I said, I didn't know of anyone. Now folks can find people. I did a study in 2014, 2015. It was the first national study of non-binary college students. And what I found was that the average age at which the folks were identifying as non-binary was 19 years old. Very common narrative was get to college, meet non-binary people during your first year, and then begin identifying as non-binary themselves. You know, individuals who, like me, really didn't know what was going on for them. You know, maybe I'm just, you know, a more feminine sort of guy, or more typically was individuals who were assigned female at birth who sort of fit into that category of being a tomboy. Even if that was not a word they particularly liked, there was a cultural space for that. And say, okay, I'm just a gender non-conforming person who's female. And it wasn't until they got to college and met people and said, this makes sense to me. This really helps me understand who I am. There's a word for it. So things have just so changed now because people do have images and role models. They don't have to wait till they get to college and meet people. Around that same time, 2015, we started seeing non-binary people in pop culture. 2014, Miley Cyrus comes out and says she's gender fluid. 2015, Asia Kate Dillon plays the first non-binary character on a mainstream TV show, Billions. And then shortly thereafter comes out themselves as being non-binary. 2015, that's the very first image we have, 2015, of a non-binary character. Now there are dozens and dozens of non-binary people in pop culture, musicians, actors, celebrities, so that young people can see themselves reflected in the world around them. And that is just so important. And it's also important for their families as well. Research shows that the majority of Gen Z, Gen Alpha know someone who is non-binary, if they are not non-binary themselves. But that decreases with age, so that their parents are unlikely to know someone who identifies as non-binary. And we know that identifying is just so important for people to be able to know somebody. You know, we can look at heterosexual society and just how folks being out as lesbian, gay, and bisexual has changed things. Same-sex marriage. In the mid-1990s, 70% of heterosexual folks in this country were opposed to same-sex marriage. Today, it's the opposite. 70% of heterosexuals say that they support same-sex marriage. That's an incredible turnaround in 25, 30 years. Almost unheard of on any sort of issue. And it's because so many people, particularly younger people, came out as lesbian, gay, and bisexual, so that their friends and families, co-workers, neighbors, whomever, got to know somebody. And so it wasn't something that was foreign to them. And also, they were able to see images of lesbian, gay, bisexual individuals. You know, we have the Ellen moment, as we like to call it. 1997, she comes out and then comes out on her TV show, Ellen. And it was, of course, headlines at the time and was very controversial. The show gets canceled the following year because advertisers didn't want to touch it. Conservative groups threatened boycotts if people would sponsor it. Fast forward 5 years to 2003, she gets a talk show, and it's hugely successful. She didn't change any. She's still an out lesbian and talks about her partner on that show. What changed was that society had changed, and she was a part of making that change happen. You know, families, if a daughter came out to her parents and said, I'm a lesbian, parents could then think about Ellen. Okay, you know, she's cute, she's funny, maybe my kid's not so cute, maybe they're not so funny, but like they can see Ellen and say, okay, here's somebody who is successful, seems happy, has a good life. I could picture my daughter like that, having a good life. Or if your son comes out to you as being gay, you might think of Neil Patrick Harris. You know, he's cute, he's funny, you know, he's got kids, you know, great parents, it seems. So I could picture that for my kid. What do you have when it comes to trans and non-binary images, historically? Trans people getting killed, getting beaten up for who they are, or conservative states passing legislation to try to restrict the rights of trans and non-binary people. So having those images is just so important for individuals to have an understanding. You know, you don't have to be like someone who's going to do active education, just being around someone who identifies as not just trans or non-binary or LGBT, really any identity. Knowing someone makes it less scary for you. It's hard to hate a group of people if someone from that group is someone you care about. Can it be done? Sure. You could say, oh, they're an exception. Everyone else in that group is evil or sinful or pathological, you name it, whatever. But it's harder to do, and especially as you know more of those people from that group. So it's not an us versus them. That them is now part of us. And I hope that my speaking today, that you now know someone who's one of them. And so I hope that now I am part of that us for you. Thank you.